Most Americans are unaware of Israel's possession of several hundred undeclared nuclear weapons that have been aimed at neighboring countries for decades, leaving regions in this world just a red button's push away from full-blown nuclear disaster. Strong words, but true words. Mordecai Vanunu is the man who told the world about Israel's nuclear weapons program in 1985. He's been imprisoned almost 2 decades all told for blowing the whistle on Israel's dirty secrets. And now he is in his final days of a pending decision over whether or not he will be able to leave Israel and live in another country.
And that's all he's ever wanted since I've known him, to have a job, a family, a home. That's it, what everybody else wants.
Most Americans don't know his name, but one Florida woman knows it well. Nurse-turned-journalist Eileen Fleming has interviewed Vanunu several times in her travels to Israel and Palestine. She learned about his outing of Israel's deadly nuclear weapons program and ultimately gave up her career as a nurse to investigate and write about one of the world's most pivotal stories.
By 1985, when he took these photos, they had upwards of 200 nuclear warheads, and this was collaborated by Frank Barnaby and other nuclear physicists, and that also Israel had begun to work on thermonuclear technology. Nobody but Israel knows what they've got now, 24 years later, because no international inspectors have ever been allowed into their nuclear facilities, nor have they ever totally fully admitted that they are even a nuclear power. But yet they continue to deny Vanunu his right to leave the state, claiming he's still got something he hasn't told, but he hasn't stopped talking since he left prison, 18 years, most all in solitary, April 21, 2004. He is still waiting for freedom.
Europeans are largely aware of Israel's undeclared nuclear arsenal, but Americans are not. That, in spite of the fact that the matter was revealed by Vanunu in the mid-'80s and fully corroborated in a 1989 book Fleming referred to, which is titled The Invisible Bomb, The Nuclear Arms Race in the Middle East by author Frank Barnaby, a nuclear physicist who worked at the Atomic Weapons Research Establishment before becoming a nuclear issues consultant to the Oxford Research Group in the UK. Fleming says Western writers are reluctant to explore Israel's nuclear weapons program due to political pressure. Veteran White House reporter Helen Thomas lost her career spanning more than 50 years for questioning Israel, and prior to that, Thomas attempted to see if President Barack Obama was willing to talk squarely about it.
Mr. President, do you know of any country in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons?
With respect to nuclear weapons, I don't want to speculate. What I know is this, that
people are so afraid to speak out against Israeli policy, and it's not just Israeli policy, it's American foreign policy. And it is understood everywhere in the world as a U.S.-Israeli collaboration in the occupation of Palestine, which began when civilized men decided to carve up the Holy Land, which is now today in pieces, because what we did to the American Indians is what's been happening to the Palestinians. They have been forced into disconnected enclaves, and if the two-state solution means the way it is now, that's no solution at all, because there is no connection. It's apartheid roads, Jewish-only settlers, and every West Bank settlement is a colony. They are all illegal under international law, as is the wall is an apartheid wall. We Americans pay at least $1.5 million per mile to build this wall, and those are 2007 numbers. And it divides Palestinians from Palestinians. It denies them the right to get to their jobs, their land, their holy sites, their family.
Fleming says just a decade ago, she was like so many other Americans, a Christian who believed Israel was an idea she was supposed to support. She was told in church that Israel was the promised land of God's chosen people. Most Americans are raised to believe that Israel is the only Middle East democracy and an ally. Traditional teachings program Americans not to question anything about Israel. Most don't realize that Palestinians in the occupied territories and Israel are ruled by aggression, segregation, and human rights violations.
When I went over there and I saw that I was not being told the truth, I knew I had to act. I knew I had to do something. It's a matter of conscience. You cannot go over there, I think, with a conscience and not come home and just be so righteously angry and so determined.
For example, there are totally different rules for children when it comes to being arrested. Palestinian children can be arrested and held at a much younger age, longer periods of time, than Israeli children. I asked Eileen when it occurred to her that she could become a link between this knowledge of Vanunu and Israel's nuclear weapons program and the American public.
When Vanunu said, "Did I know that President Kennedy tried to stop Israel from developing weapons of mass destruction?" I had not a clue about it until he told me. The State Department has reams of information going back at least to Kennedy, if not before, about Israel's weapons of mass destruction facility, which remains uninspected. Shimon Peres said their nuclear program was for peace, and they would not be the first to introduce nuclear weapons. Vanunu also told me that during the LBJ administration, 2 senators would come to inspect, but they didn't know that Israel had boarded up, blocked up the elevators and stairways that led down to the 7-story clandestine underground weapons of mass destruction facility called the Dimona. It's in the Negev. And then when Nixon became president, he said, "Okay, we'll just ignore it. We won't even send our senators." Not any international inspectors have ever been allowed into Israel's nuclear facilities.
The first U.S. president to ever fully disclose Israel's nuclear weapons program in a public audience is former U.S. President James Carter, and it happened in May 2008. Fleming believes that when it came to Mordecai Vanunu's free speech trial, that Israel timed that prosecution to coincide with an important political development in Palestine.
In March of 2006, just a few weeks after Vanunu's freedom of speech trial began, which began January 25, 2006, the same day Hamas was democratically elected, and it really was rescheduled at the last minute to fall on that date. No reporters were really there, and nobody bothered to document a freedom of speech trial in the democracy of Israel. And what Vanunu told me was that ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, BBC, all the major media outlets all wanted to interview him, but their editors said no, because they didn't want trouble with the Israeli authorities, because everything has to go through the Israeli censors. I began a series of interviews with Vanunu. I was interested in his childhood and his Christianity, how that helped get him through prison. But it was not until January of 2006 that I began to become a muckraker, documenting, I think, the most phenomenal story of our generation.
This story grabbed Eileen Fleming and became a cause she absolutely could not resist.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Love God, and if you truly do, you're going to love every sister and brother on the planet, because we're all connected. But what we've got is a big problem with bad religion, fundamentalism, religiosity, superiority complex of particular people, that they are more chosen, that God made a real estate deal, and that they have no responsibility to uphold the basic tenets of what Judaism is about, which is justice and do not oppress the stranger.
And this intrepid journalist says it translates into a life of human rights activism, and her background in healthcare made scenes of human suffering all the more unbearable.
Once a nurse, always a nurse. So of course you know more than most people would be cognizant of what happens to children because of particular environments. Can you imagine being a little boy and seeing your father, your brothers, your uncles being humiliated, being arrested for no reason other than being against the occupation, standing for hours and hours and hours at over 600 checkpoints in the West Bank just to get to the other side, just to get to your family, to your holy site. And these little children, what have they done? All they've done is be born in occupied territory, but they are suffering unbelievable psychological torture, emotional torture, but yet I spent time in the refugee camps. I've been to Jenin camp, in the home of underground Fatah, and I've seen the family values. I've seen them love their children. I've seen it, their patience. It's not put on. If we could only be so patient with our children, well, I immediately thought of myself. But what I have seen there in every single Palestinian home I have been in, and I have been in many, the love that they have for their children, and all they want is their children to have a better deal than they have now, and so do I.
So why would Americans be largely unaware of this important information about Israel and nuclear weapons? And why would the media seemingly ignore it so much?
Totally not on their radar screen, as it is not on Americans' radar screen.
Now Eileen says there is only one goal, and that is to see Mordecai Vanunu live as a free man. His freedom hangs in the balance now, and Israel has the ability to allow him to live out his days in peace.
Because Israel did not allow Vanunu to leave in 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, I found come 2010, somebody had to write about his freedom of speech trial. So I did it, and my third book is Beyond Nuclear, Mordecai Vanunu's freedom of speech trial and my life as a muckraker. And the restrictions he was put under began the day he walked out of prison, April 21, 2004, and he has been forbidden to have a cell phone, an internet connection, to speak to any foreigners, to leave the state. But of course, he has a cell phone, he has a website, he's on Facebook, he's on YouTube, and he has spoken to anybody. Probably at one time he told me it could be upwards of 5,000 people he has spoken to. Israel put him back into jail for 78 days, and this was punishment for speaking to foreign media in 2004. In particular, the biggest media we in Americans would know is Amy Goodman, whose 2004 interview was used as major testimony against him. Amy did not bother to ever follow up with Vanunu until July 2nd of 2007, which was when he was sentenced to 6 months more in prison for talking to her. And she did phone him that day for a follow-up, and he told her, get lost, because where have you been since 2004? So he was not talking to media at that day. I showed up a few weeks later, and we did talk.
For Eileen Fleming and Mordecai Vanunu, friendship and advocacy have at times led down rocky paths. Still, she sees a direct link between the future of this man in Israel, who blew the whistle on undisclosed nuclear weapons, and the future of the people of the United States and in her own state.
The bottom line for me is I want to change USA foreign policy. I have a dream, many. One of them is to run for House of Representatives, because I know that the security, the safety, the peace of every resident in Florida is entwined with all of the United States, is entwined with all of the world, and I am a big supporter in equal human rights, but I am wanting to dismantle the industrial military security surveillance complex. So that's a huge thing to take on, but I also feel I have taken on something by continuing to report on Vanunu's story when the media wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Granting Mordecai Vanunu the freedom to leave Israel would be a well-received gesture. It would be good on Israel's part, and it would not be a security risk. The information has long since been released and published. The damage has been done. Fleming says she believes Israel may decide in his favor, and it would be in Israel's favor also. Time will tell, and it won't be long. I'm Tim King reporting for SalemNews.com. told the world about Israel's nuclear weapons program in 1985. He's been imprisoned almost 2 decades, all told, for blowing the whistle on Israel's dirty secrets. And now he is in his final days of a pending decision over whether or not he will be able to leave Israel and live in another country.
And that's all he's ever wanted since I've known him, to have a job, a family, a home. That's it, what everybody else wants.
Most Americans are unaware of Israel's possession of several hundred undeclared nuclear weapons that have been aimed at neighboring countries for decades, leaving regions in this world just a red button's push away from full-blown nuclear disaster. Strong words, but true words. Mordecai Vanunu is the man. Americans don't know his name, but one Florida woman knows it well. Nurse-turned-journalist Eileen Fleming has interviewed Vanunu several times in her travels to Israel and Palestine. She learned about his outing of Israel's deadly nuclear weapons program and ultimately gave up her career as a nurse to investigate and write about one of the world's most pivotal stories.
By 1985, when he took these photos, they had upwards of 200 nuclear warheads, and this was collaborated by Frank Barnaby and other nuclear physicists, and that also Israel had begun to work on thermonuclear technology. Nobody but Israel knows what they've got now, 24 years later, because no international inspectors have ever been allowed into their nuclear facilities, nor have they ever totally fully admitted that they are even a nuclear power. But yet they continue to deny Vanunu his right to leave the state, claiming he's still got something he hasn't told, but he hasn't stopped talking since he left prison, 18 years, most all in solitary, April 21, 2004. He is still waiting for freedom.
Europeans are largely aware of Israel's undeclared nuclear arsenal, but